sure you enter your email address and your password. Now, um, so once you enter all that information, then this is the screen that you are going to see. As you can see here, it lists all the tiles that you will have possibly have access to, but the two that we're going to be discussing today are the cohort and dropout tiles. So before I continue on, Joe is going to talk to you about the frequently used tiles that are located in the Ames portal.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, just in my experience, there are three main tiles that are used when looking at accountability for schools. Two of which we have an opportunity to clean up throughout the school year. The first one being college and career readiness, and Marcy already talked about the areas at which we want young men and young ladies to benchmark in on the CCR, being the ACT, AP, work keys, college credit, career tech, and military. So our goal is to have them benchmark in one of those areas. Cohort being the second one, and that's the one we're going to focus on today because the deadline for cleanup is quickly approaching. When you pull up your cohort information, you'll see tell you how many graduates you have, what percentage overall grad rate, and federal information. And then, of course, Plan 2020, if you have not had a chance to look at that, that's our A through F report card information. And the indicators for the A through F report card: academic achievement, academic growth, grad rate, ELL, college and career readiness, and chronic absenteeism. And Marcy,
Okay.
back to you.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on that 4-year cohort graduation rate tile. Now, a cohort consists of students who enter the ninth grade, who are entering the ninth grade. These are the same students who would determine a school's graduation rate 4 years later. So those are the students who you are going to count in your graduation rate, those students who entered ninth grade and then they graduated within a 4-year time period. So how is the graduation rate calculated? Well, the graduation rate is calculated by taking the number of students who graduated in 4 years and then dividing that by the number of entering first time ninth graders who entered into school. So you can actually calculate your graduation rate even prior to getting the information from the Prevention and Support Service, because all you do is take the total number of students who graduated and divide that by the total number of students who entered as first year ninth graders 4 years prior. So this year, what you're going to be looking at, you're going to be looking at the 2016-17 cohort. Now, to determine the number of students who will be considered graduates. Now, what students are considered non-graduates? The students who are considered non-graduates would be those students who are still enrolled, which means they did not complete all the requirements for graduation within a 4-year time period, but they remained enrolled in school, working towards completion of those requirements, or those students who remain enrolled as a special education student until the age of 21. Then you have your students who have withdrawn. Students who have withdrawn, but records are not requested. Schools do not have any documentation to support that the student transferred. Then you have your no-shows. Your no-shows are those students who leave over the summer and they never return to complete any type of official transfer or dropout form. Then you have your dropouts. Your dropout means that they were enrolled in school at some time during the previous school year, was not enrolled at the beginning of the current year, was not a graduate from high school, or completed a state or system approved education program. And then you have those students who are excluded from being considered a dropout. And that will be those students who transfer to another public school, a private school, state or district approved education program. And then their temporary absence due to suspension or school approved illness or death. Then you have your federal completers. There is a difference between a federal graduate and a Alabama graduate, okay? So your federal completers are those students who exited with a document other than a regular diploma, such as a GED, even though that is, we consider that equivalent to a high school diploma in the state of Alabama. The federal government will not count that person as a graduate. In those students who take essentials or life courses, because the content, those standards for those essential or life courses differ from our standards. Alternative achievement standards, Alabama occupation diploma, or special education certificate. All of those are not considered, the federal government will not consider any of those students who have those documents as being a graduate. Now, how do you go about finding the information that's in the Ames portal? You're going to enter in the base cohort year, which would be 2016-17, and that's your 4-year cohort. Your system will pre-populate, so whatever district you're in, and then your school will populate in the next box. Then I do want to say this, it's very important that the cohort application is for view only. You do not need to make any changes in the cohort application. All changes should be made in iNow. And as Joe stated earlier, the changes must be made in the prior year's academic session in Chalkable, 20 to 48 hours in order for the change to take effect. And that means you need to make sure that all of your changes are done by Friday, November 13th, because the deadline for certifying the system is November 16th, and that will be done by someone at the central office. Now, if you just so happen to make changes on the 16th, you found a student who was actually a graduate, but they were listed as not being a graduate, unfortunately, that student will not count for you, okay? Now, so once you enter in all that information, then what you see here is going to populate. What you want to do is click on Export to Excel. Then that's going to create an Excel document. Now, in this Excel document, if you look across the top, you'll see grade level in cohort. That means that they came in 2016. I'm just giving you an example, and they're still in that cohort. So you want to filter this document because you only want to look for those students who have, who are a 12th grader. So you want to filter this by grade level. So in filtering this, you can either look under federal graduate, or you can look under federal status. And so Joe, if you click, so we can make sure that they're seeing federal graduate, so they see the grade level. So you can either look under federal graduate, or you can look under federal status. Under federal graduate, see where I circle false? That means that the federal government does not consider that student a graduate. And if you look over under federal status, you'll see where also right next to that, it says enroll. So that means that that student did not meet all the requirements. So once you have filtered this, then if you need to find your documentation as to whether or not that student was a graduate, if that student moved somewhere else, and then whatever changes you need to make those changes in Chalkable. Now, if for some reason you had a student who did graduate, but is not populating here because they completed in the summer, then what you'll need to do is make sure that you print out a copy of that child's transcript, that student's transcript, and place that in the CUM folder. Because once this information is certified, prevention and support will randomly pull some graduates and they're going to ask you for some documentation. So if they just so happen to pull a student that was previously listed as false, and you went back in and you enter information saying that no, this is true, this child should count as a graduate, they're going to ask you for that documentation. So you'll only need to place a copy of the child's transcript in their CUM folder if you had to go back and make some changes. It will not also hurt to make sure that all those students who are listed as being a graduate, that they are actually a graduate.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, dropout. All right, determine the dropout rate. As Marcy explained, you take the students who entered in the 9th grade in the cohort or transferred in to your school, a bona fide move or school choice. But once they transfer to your school, they fall into your cohort. And then you take the number of graduates, divide it, and there's your grad rate. Review the current status of students identified as dropouts in the school within grades 7 through 12. And what we're going to go through the 4-year process to determine if the status of these students changed, and all changes will need to take place in the prior year's academic session in iNow and Chalkable. When you filter the cohort data from the Excel spreadsheet, all right, what I filter by is ALSDE status to bring up withdrawn and dropout, and that will provide you all the information that you need across the board. It also covers federal status. It'll give you withdrawal codes. It'll tell you if they're a no-show or they got enrolled. So you'll filter from the Excel spreadsheet to narrow down your scope to the data that you need, specifically the dropout, and in some cases withdrawal. They may count against you as well as a dropout if they withdrew or you withdrew them and they didn't attend a public school or a private school and didn't obtain an education after they left your school. All right, we're going to talk about some tips to go over when trying to locate students once you've narrowed your search down. Had a discussion with a principal last week, and he was frustrated. He had this big list that he narrowed down from the cohort, and as we went through and we talked about different ones, ladies and gentlemen, at some point you're just going to hit a wall, and it's going to be you've done all you can do to try to locate a young man or young lady so you can correct the information in iNow and have that positive impact on your grad rate. And sometimes that's just the way it is. You've done all you can do. You may have a student who just disappears, but in general, tips for locating students: look for records request. Also, don't be afraid to contact people on the student's contact list. I've worked down the list and called up to 6 people on the list. As many people are there that'll answer the phone, and I've called to see if I can track down where a student may have gone or how they're obtaining their education. Attempt to find a student on social media. We live in a world where young men and young ladies are constantly on social media. Check Facebook, check Twitter, check all the social media outlets, and then contact currently enrolled students who may know where the student is attending. Sometimes we do have young men and young ladies that just disappear, and the only people who know are their friends that they may have talked to at school. They may be, a young man or young lady that's age of majority, no longer living at home, and their friends may be the only ones that know where they are. Contact military recruiters, see if the individual has gone in the military. Now, they unfortunately will not be able to go in the military without a GED or high school diploma. So they're kind of spinning their wheels unless they obtain that. And then you can also conduct a statewide search in Chalkable. But remember, as Marcy said, you can't say it enough. All changes that are need to be made to the cohort has to be made in iNow Chalkable. You cannot make a change directly to the cohort tile. You what do you do if they just disappear? Poof, they're gone. If you go into iNow and you go to your students tab to the left, scroll down to enrollment, it'll bring up, and you have to be in your current year for it to bring up this data. You can't be in last year's iNow, you got to be in this current year's data. And then you can search your district and you can search your state. There are times when mistakes are made and students' identification numbers are changed. But as you look deeper, if you find someone with the same name, you look at the date of birth, but they've got a different ID number, student ID number, then that's the young man or young lady that you're trying to find. Mistakes do happen. They do get miscoded in iNow, and as they transfer from one school to the next, we don't necessarily even know what information they're presenting to the previous school. So search district, search state. And maintaining clean data. This is probably the most important task to take place during a young man's or young lady's 4 years at your school. If you keep the clean data and you do the work throughout their time at your school, if they do leave and they're counted as a dropout, or they disappear, or they move to another state, or even some cases move to another country, that you have this data in a CUME folder or withdrawal folder that you can look at and discern whether or not the young man or young lady is, in continue to get their education elsewhere. Did have a situation where a foreign exchange student, now when they transfer in, they were counted in my cohort. When they withdrew the withdrawal paperwork, the exit interview, the agency that was handling the exchange student stated the student was returning to their home country, but it was never coded correctly. Now, in the maintaining clean data slide, I've included a hyperlink to exit interview memorandum from the state. It came out in July 2020 that specifically outlines the process and the requirements for conducting an exit interview for young men and young ladies when they leave your school. And again, code withdrawals correctly in iNow. If they're not coded, it plays an important role in the grad rate and the CCR rate on the report card. Be sure to conduct transcript audits, ensuring students are on target to graduate, credentialing and CCR. Avoid students taking the same class more than once. Keeping valid records, doing the transcript audits helps with advisement, helps with obtaining a credential, helps with ensuring that students stay enrolled in school, and it helps them to understand that there is someone at the school that genuinely cares about them. You can use that transcript audit to do advisement and goal setting for the young man and young ladies. We always started with, what do you want to do when you get old like me? And from there, we work backwards when doing advisement and doing transcript audits and course selection, because what he wants to do by the time he gets my age will determine the multiple pathways that he can take. Military is a great pathway a young man or young lady can take to obtain career credentials and even post-secondary education. But it all started with, what do you want to do when you get this age, and working backwards to determine, This is your route if you go to college. This is your route if you go to military. This is your route if you go career tech and maybe a community college. So keep that in mind. And all of that stuff helps maintain that clean data for, or in the event you get a dropout. All right. And we've had many discussions about where to keep this data. And ultimately, principals, assistant principals, they come and go. Counselors, they come and go. I prefer that all the information is kept in the CUME folder because those CUME folders will remain. Everybody else may be gone, but whoever's doing the cleanup will know to go pull the CUME folder. And in that CUME folder, they may see a student profile, may see progress reports. And I know you're thinking, why is some of this information important? For example, I had a young lady that enrolled at my school in the 9th grade and was a no-show for 10th grade. I looked at her transcripts. I looked at her progress reports. I looked at everything. There was nothing in her file other than withdrawn, unknown. But her transcripts reflected that she made very good grades. I looked at her previous school. She transferred from a private school to my school. So getting the totality or the big picture of everything, I was able to discern that there's no way this young lady just completely dropped off the face of the earth and no longer attained her education. So then I had to refer back to the contact information and call as many individuals as I could to find out that she did get her education, and it was done through a homeschool program. But if it weren't for looking at the CUME folder, looking at her profile, looking at her progress reports, the contact information, the transcripts, attendance, discipline, schedule, and even though there wasn't an exit interview in there because she was a no-show, but also look for records requests. All of that information can provide documentation for your cleanup and evidence that you need to hold on to if ever questioned. I've included a link in here for the exit interview form that is required by the State Department. And we're going to briefly talk about coding and cleanup. All right, ladies and gentlemen, when you go to clean up a student's data, you have to first determine what was their last year in attendance at your school, because that is what you will have to log into to correct the data unless they're a no-show. If they're a no-show, that means that they were enrolled at your school for that school year and then they just didn't show up. So in that case, you'd have to go to the previous school year. So you will go to the last school year of record and log into Chalkable Eye Now, pull up the student's information. And once you pull up the student's information, you can go to the Enrollment tab. Once you're in the Enrollment tab, you get a screen up, the one at the top, which reflects they're enrolled. And then the screen at the bottom, you want to highlight that area and then click withdrawal. You cannot click withdrawal unless you highlight that area to bring up that information. So click to highlight and then click withdrawal. And you're going to change the enrollment status. That's why it's important that you keep up and have as much documentation as you possibly can, because you're going to change that enrollment status to withdrawal, and it's going to bring up reason code. So you're going to change the reason code. In this particular case, change the reason code to transfer in-state private school. And then you're going to get an additional box that you have to complete information on. And it's going to ask you, all right, then what's the institution's name? It's not only, we're not just going to take your word for it that they went to a private school, but you need to complete the information here. So if it needs to be verified, they can verify it. So institution name, contact requester. That's where you can look at the request for records that should be in the CUME folder. It'll provide you all this information. It'll provide you contact email, contact phone, and records request, checkbox, and withdrawal signed by guardian on file. And then once you add all that information, you need to click the enter. And
Dr. Gardner, this is Dr. Shields. We got a wonder from Ms. Howell about this exit interview form. She's asking, is it used only for dropouts?
no, and great question. Now, it's actually mandated by the state that you use that exit interview form for every student who leaves your school. Some of you may, and not say every student, not the ones who graduate, but the ones who withdraw or the ones who drop out and they come and let you know they're going to drop out. It's kind of difficult to do with those that are just no-shows. But if you have a way of getting in touch with them and can complete that form, please do that. I'm going to take a moment and just go back a little bit and show you the form. All right, this is the form here, the student exit interview form, and it asks for information regarding where they're going to attend, if they're getting a GED, but there's also a place for the principal's signature at the bottom to certify that this information is correct, and a place for the parent to sign as well. And that is attached to the document, but it's also in the exit interview memorandum that I showed you earlier.
And we will make sure it's in our Google Drive folder.
Thank you, ma'am. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the codes, transfer codes. You notice these say school choice. These apply to districts that have adopted the school choice based on failing school status. For example, one district that I'm working with only has 2 schools that are considered school choice. One is the school that's a magnet school or IB school, and they have to apply to get into that school. And the other one is not. They can take students and must take students from all the other high schools in that district. So that's where the transfer codes for school choice come into play. And withdrawal codes, transfer in system, transfer in system private. The WA stands for transfers in system or dropouts in system, or withdrawal in system. B's are the state. WB1, transfer in state public school, transfer in state private school, transfer in state church or home. And keep in mind, if you do the withdrawal code, transfer in state, or transfer in system, you're going to have to complete that information on the enrollment tab when you change the withdrawal status of the young man and young lady. So you need to find out where they're actually going. One thing that's often overlooked, because it's easy to just code withdrawal unknown, but some that you miss, you say you have a young man or young lady who is deceased. There is a withdrawal code for that, and that doesn't count against your dropout rate. Withdrawal code for disciplinary action does count against your dropout rate. If you have a young man or young lady that is taken into custody, youth detention, or adult jail, transferred to youth services, that is a bona fide transfer. It does not count against your dropout rate. So you got to be careful. Just because you see a withdrawal code doesn't mean that you're good to go. Transfers out of country, you may have some of those depending on your EL population. And I would go back through CUME folders and try to find a copy of the birth certificate, documenting what country they were born in, and then get as much information as I can from family members, friends, and hopefully able to establish that that young man has returned to his home country. And then dropout codes. We unfortunately see a lot of these, the most common of which are academic difficulties, dislike of school experience, behavior problems, and reason unknown. These, without a doubt, count against your grad rate.
And Joe, if they don't see any of these codes in their system, I would suggest that they have their IT person contact their iNow person at Chalkable, whoever their liaison is at Chalkable, about getting some of these codes if they don't have these.
Thank you, Marcy.
And then even on the military, and you mentioned this earlier, even though the military can count for you towards your CCR, if that child drops out of school or receives an alternative degree like a GED, then that is still going to count as a dropout.
And just another side note, in a few months, we'll do a CCR cleanup presentation. While you can, if you know a student who's graduating and going to the military, make sure you get a copy of their enlistment papers. Just like you got to have a copy of the certificate for career credential, you need to make sure you get a copy of their enlistment papers to put in the file, because that is one of the bona fide documentations for military.
There's a couple really good questions in the chat that we may be able to address. We may have to consult with another office
Yes,
to
ma'am.
make sure we're giving you the right information. But Dr. Burge, Dr. Garney, I want to check that, see if there's some that you could address now.
Okay, Marcy, can you look at that? And
here, I can read them to you. Would that be easier?
Yeah,
For
please.
transfer out of state to church homeschool, this is Charlotte. Would the code transfer out of state be correct, even though student did not leave the state?
No, there's a transfer in-state church or homeschool, but a transfer out of state when the student did not leave the state. Are you talking about maybe for a homeschool program that is based out of another school or another state? Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, in that particular case, I have withdrawn them to a homeschool program out of state and still provided the documentation based on records request. For example, I had one out of Ohio that a young lady and her sister both went to. So I used that records request and used that documentation with address that it was a transfer out of state homeschool program.
And another question I see was, does it matter what type of dropout code is used? Yes, because you can use that as part of your needs assessment data, because we want to stress that when you're looking at data, you're not just looking at assessment results. So you want to be able to look at to see whether or not there are any types of common trends within your school. Like if you have a lot of students who drop out of school because they dislike the school experience, then you know that you need to be working on your culture and climate. If you have a lot of students who are dropping out, they may be having academic difficulties, then we need to look at what types of services we're providing those students. We need to look at whether or not our PST team or RTI needs to be revamped. So yes, it will matter what dropout code you use, because if they drop out and say that they're entering into the military, well, what caused that student to go ahead and drop out and enter into the military when they could have received their high school diploma and then enter into the military?
Thank you, Marcy.
Another question is, which code should be used for Penn Foster High School? I'm not quite familiar with that particular high school.
I am.
Okay.
Penn Foster is based out of state, and That's the very one I was thinking of that I used a transfer out of state, private or homeschool. And I had the documentation where they did a records request and a formal letter from the school stating that they were enrolled in their school. So that was the out of state transfer. Okay. And young men and young ladies, just another quick note that keep in mind, this is not a sprint. It's, if anything, it's a triathlon and a marathon. And the better job you do, or the more effective or efficient job you do at collecting this data along the way, it helps you in the end if a student does withdraw and doesn't enroll in another school, or they drop out, or they're a no-show. So, but I also need to tell you, make sure you keep data on file, you keep the documentation on file that warranted the correction in I-Now. So the last thing you want to do is get caught making the changes and not have the documentation to support the changes that you've made. So finish the race, freeze and save your evidence. And next up we have, and I'm assuming that this session was still recorded, Melissa, hopefully. I didn't click record, so I hope somebody did.
And before we finish with the dinner minutes, I do want to remind everyone just a general overview of everything. These are just some tips and strategies that we were providing to you because oftentimes we found that most schools could have received a higher report card grade if their graduation rate was accurate, or if they coded those students as if they received their credentialing in CTE, or if they earned a dual enrollment credit, but it wasn't placed on those transcripts. All of those things basically will come back and will cause you to have a low report card score. So it's very important to make sure that you're keeping up with your documentation, begin tracking that student when they enter 9th grade. And then the courses that they're signed up for, make sure that that's the pathway that they want to lead to when they leave from high school. So if they come in 9th grade and they say that they want to go to college, make sure they're taking all the required courses. If they want to go into the workforce or military. So make sure that all of those things are lined up. And then if there's any questions that you have pertaining to I-Now, make sure you contact your IT department and then have them to contact their contact person at I-Now.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we provided you with some links to the Office of School Improvement YouTube channel, the Office of School Improvement Google Drive folder. Keep in mind, next session is to be determined, and it is based upon your feedback, what you all say you need. And please take a moment. This is not a long reflection survey. Meg, if you would please post this link in the chat as well, if you hadn't already. But take a moment to give us some feedback on this session. I know we moved through it rather quickly. It seemed like there was a lot of information to cover in a short amount of time, but hopefully what we have provided you will help as you clean up and you make that sprint toward the finish line before the 16th.
How do you know what region?
You want to answer that, Melissa?
Yeah. Bridget, which district are you coming from?
Montgomery.
Okay, you would be ASU.
Let me also say that we've got the reflection link in there, and I've pasted the presentation links for both the PDF and the slides. Some people got on here a bit late. We will be adding those other tools of the recording so that you can listen to it. But if you check the link right now, you've got the presentation to our folder, the reflection, and PDF of the slides, and the actual presentation itself.
Thank you, ma'am. And I think you just went over that. And thank you everyone for being in attendance. We're going to stay on just a little bit longer. If you have any questions, any pressing questions that you would like to ask, please don't hesitate to let us know. And thank you. Look forward to our next lunch session.
And if you have any questions or need any support with regards to transcript auditing, then the OSI department will be more than happy to come in and assist you with that.
And we also said if you had any other questions and want to put them in the chat, that we will stay on. We know that we committed to a shorter time frame, but if you still have questions, put them in the chat and we'll be around a bit longer.